Good day, everyone. Let us talk about Karl Rahner's Theology of Grace, its strength and its weaknesses. I find Rahner's definition of grace as God's self-communication to every person more meaningful. That God, who is the giver, is himself a gift. Communication in this sense is not just a word that God speaks to us, and not just a thing, a staff or possessions like the prophets of old. Remember, in the time of Moses, God revealed himself only through words when he called and commanded Moses. The best example is the Torah, the Ten Commandments. Then God revealed himself to Moses on a thing through a burning bush, because no one is worthy to see the face of God, because they will die. But when Jesus arrived, God revealed himself, his own very self. Jesus is not merely a word nor a thing, but he is God himself. This understanding of Rahner is not floating in the air, but grounded in our human experiences and realities. We are not only talking merely words and things, but most importantly, we are talking of a person, in the person of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is the very strength of Rahner's theology of grace. He goes back to the very source of grace, which is revealed in the person of Christ. He understands grace in the sense that ordinary people could relate, because it is grounded in our human experiences of God. In the incarnation event, when God chose to be one of us, as what the first chapter of the Gospel of John was saying, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, is a living manifestation of God's self-communication to every person. Jesus did not remain a word, but he became flesh. He has a body, and not only that he became flesh, but most importantly, he dwelt among us. God descends into our human history and became man like us, except sin. God's self-communication enters into human history, meaning Jesus, who is divine, became truly man, but without removing his divinity. This is something we need to constantly understand through the grace of God, that how come God, who chose to be one with us, remained divine? It is a mystery. We still need to continually fathom the mystery of God's self-communication. As Rahner would say, he remains the mystery which alone is self-evident, the term of man's highest act, the term by which this act is born and made possible. God remained the Holy One, who is really accessible only in worship. God remains the absolutely nameless and inviolable One, who can never be comprehended. As Catholic Christians, this is what we truly believe, that Jesus has two natures, that Jesus is 100% divine and 100% human. This is what the Council of Chalcedon is saying. Jesus, from the very beginning until the end, was fully human and fully divine. In connection to that, Rahner claimed that in God's self-communication, he was not diminished, he was not mutated or became lesser a God. Instead, God is so infinite that sharing himself fully with the finite is part of, inclusive of his infinitude. Same as true in Jesus. Jesus' divinity was not removed when he was rejected, when he was persecuted, when he was betrayed, when he was hanging on the cross, when he died on the cross. Rather, he elevates finitude to infinity through his glorious resurrection. God's self-communication is what Rahner described as the climax of subjectivity of communication. He said, and I quote, "What is communicated is really God in his own being, and in this way it is a communication for the sake of knowing and possessing God in immediate vision and love." This self-communication means precisely that objectivity of the gift and communication, which is the climax of subjectivity, on the side of the one communicating and of the one receiving. In other words, the core of God's self-communication must involve both God and man. Therefore, it is a dynamic event and not a static one, a communication which is moving and flowing. Let us remember that Jesus did not stay in one place or even stay in his hometown, the Nazareth, but he went to different places where people are. He healed the sick. He went to different places. He talks to people. He preached to them, and he teaches them. He eats, he drinks, and he rests. This is also a strength in Rahner's understanding of grace, because God who creates continually creates. God moves even in times we even notice it, because creation is a living manifestation of God's love and presence among us. This self-communication of God makes us truly human, because Rahner said that the term self-communication is really intended to signify that God in his own most proper reality makes himself the innermost constitutive element of man. It is what our creation class taught us, that every creature has a glimpse of the Creator, the infinite mark in us. Because of this, man became the focal point of God's grace. Man became the center of God's infinite graces. That is why God is always present in our midst. God stays with us even if we don't want to. He is the Emmanuel whose presence never ceases. As Father Aquino would say, we are never godless. Moreover, God's self-communication is freeing, liberating, and unburdening. That when God gives himself to us, he frees us, he liberates us, and he unloads the burden we carry. This is what Jesus did when he was still here on earth physically. Jesus breaks boundaries of social, cultural, religious, and political. When Jesus healed the sick, he was not only healing the person physically, but he healed also his or her status in society, in religion, and in culture. Jesus never gets tired of liberating us, freeing us, and unloading the burden within us. Isn't it a strength of Rahner's understanding of grace? However, one thing I see as weakness of this understanding of grace is in the aspect of human response, our own responsibility. I am afraid that many will fall into the trap of laxity. I remember the things that we talk about reappropriating Adamic myth on the original plenty. This is before the fall, when Adam and Eve was still in the Garden of Eden, of which everything was provided for them. This is when humanity had everything they needed to survive, to thrive, and to flourish. Then somewhere, sometime, someone became anxious, then greedy, that which is the inner snake within us. It is our negative reaction of something positive, our fear of losing these things and our wanting more, which result to reducing other people into nothing, lead us to our own forgetfulness and our own infidelities to God. That despite of the abundance of God's grace, God's self-communication, God's giving of Himself, we react negatively by saying, naabitaw permi ang Ginoo, maluoy bitaw siya permi. That God will always be there for us, never abandon us, and heal our sickness that result to not to take care of ourselves. There is a cult that present until today who overemphasize that God will heal them, and they will just pray over it if they have sickness and never had check up with the doctors. I did not say it is wrong to pray and surrender everything to God, but of course we need to do our part. The attitude of self-entitlement, that we deserve to be given much, and many of our brothers and sisters are like this. In my own experience before, I have this understanding of grace as a form of reward. When you do good, God will give you grace, but if you do bad, you will be punished. This understanding sometimes influences my decisions and living out of my faith. Sometimes I have this thinking that God will not allow people to prosper if they undermine others. God will not give or bestow His grace to those who are in the state of sin. Until now, I have still this notion of grace. That when there are not so good things happen in me and in my family, I easily connect it to my wrong notion of grace. It's just kind of a wiring in my mind. That when there are this notion of grace builds an unhealthy image of God, the image of a punishing God, a God who is a policeman. And it builds also an unhealthy image of myself. Before I portray a good boy image so that they may like me and reward me of the good things I done. Now, after the course on sin and grace, it opened my eyes to see the bigger picture of grace. It deepened my understanding of grace, that God, who is so gracious and loving, poured His graces to all believers and non-believers, whether they are sinful or not. That God's grace is inclusive and not exclusive. That we are not only the dispensers of God's grace, and most importantly, that grace is not only a word and a thing, but a person in the person of our Lord Jesus Christ. I am Brother Primitivo, the now Junior MEC. Thank you and God bless us all.